Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 116. Freilich and Pesach Sheini, which we will begin discussing right now, being that it's today, and then we'll talk about some of the other timely factors and matters of this week, like Ba'imen and Pasha Behar, here outside of Chutz Laretz, and Pasha B'chukese in Eretz Yisrael. But a few little housekeeping. First, let me just say and remind you again that you can submit your questions to meaningfullife.com/MyLife anonymously at our forum there. The questions, thank God, Baruch Hashem, keep coming, but I just want to say it because not everybody is always aware. There's new listeners, and I welcome them as well to this series, which has become something far more of a phenomenon than I never imagined. And I believe the reason for that is really because it's called the Chutza, plain and simple. Simply applying Chassidus, applying the teachings, the treasures that we were given by the Rebbe, which is part of Kol HaTeira Kula, and applying it to life situations and challenges, contemporary issues that we all struggle with and deal with. And this is only possible when we bring the issues to the table, and then I do my best to try to find the sources to explain and apply them. And I also appreciate all the feedback, footnotes, comments, remarks, and of course sources that so many of you send in to us. And please keep that coming on any given topic. As you know, those that have listened to this, we really try to not avoid any issue, obviously spoken with discretion and in a proper and Chassidic fashion, but nevertheless addressing issues as directly and as candidly as possible. Also, as I mentioned, since we have now created a new YouTube channel specifically for MyLife, so please subscribe to that. It helps us grow, and share it with others. And if you'd like to dedicate, finally, a episode, please go to meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where you also find an opportunity to dedicate or sponsor an episode, or more than one, to a loved one or a memory of someone that you find special in your life. With that, let me go straight into Pesach. I should also add one more thing, that also, in response to many questions, these are also available, all these recordings, to download in iTunes, and to download it to your mobile or to your, wherever it is where you travel. And you can find that information as well at the same place, at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. There's a landing page that has all the information there, and should need be, just send us an email, and you'll get a prompt response to any question or any technical issue you may need help with. Okay. Pesach Sheini is today, which is of course 1 month exactly from Pesach Rishon, and that is the reason we talk about Pesach Sheini, is because in the Torah it tells us that Parsha Ba'aleischa talks about the people who are either b'derech recheka, or where they were tamei, they were impure, or they were too far from the Beis Hamikdash to be able to bring a korban Pesach. So they came to Moshe Rabbeinu complaining, Lama nigora, why are we less? Why are we missing out? Why should we be missing out on such an important mitzvah? And from the rare times where you find that a mitzvah is initiated by people, not from above, but we call it Chassidus Applied, an initiative from below. They cried out, and as a result, Moshe went to Hashem, and Hashem gave this mitzvah Pesach Sheini with certain conditions that you can bring a second chance to bring the korban Pesach. And interestingly, however, here you don't have the al-matzah sumerudim, and you don't have the prohibition of eating chametz. So in the middle of a weekday, so to speak, in a day we don't have all the elements of a Pesach, we have the ability to experience Pesach for those that are distant or tamei. So as he brings the Frierdiker Rebbe in Hayem Yem from the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe and from the Rabbeim, that this teaches us the lesson as nishtakim for foul. There's never something to say is hopeless. Something is all lost. Because we see here that even though technically it says clearly in the Torah when and how you bring the korban Pesach, here you can bring it, and though it doesn't have the same, and without the conditions that had Pesach, the Pesach Rishon, a second chance basically, which is a lesson to all of us, as he says. If someone's in a distant, the time when they have to experience, let's say, a transcendent experience, Pesach experience, we're applying it now today. Because today, obviously, we don't bring the korban. We don't bring the korban Pesach Rishon either. However, we have the day, we don't say tachnun and other elements people have accustomed to eat matzah, and so on. So the energy of the day exists. And what is the energy today? The fundamental lesson. It's not necessarily today you can't bring the offering because there's no Beis Hamikdash, but the message and the theme is as relevant and as alive as ever, and that is that we have the ability to realize that even if a person is b'derech recheka, which means distant, that can be psychologically distant, emotionally, in any way that a person didn't feel the connection of a Pesach experience, which means a transcendent experience. Yetzias Mitzrayim, Chassidus explains, is going out of your limits and boundaries and inhibitions and fears and all the things that inhibit our movement, of course psychologically, emotionally included. So Pesach Sheini gives us the opportunity, you can do it. And it's interesting that this comes through the initiative from below, because in some ways, even though of course God is Kol Yachol, can do anything He wishes, but there's a partnership involved. So Pesach, Rishon, Pesach, the Pesach we've celebrated Nisan a month ago is Nigla Le'em Melech Malchem Lochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Go'olam. That came from above. That was a revelation from above. But this comes from below, demonstrating the power that we have when we cry out and we call out, which is an additional lesson. So in addition to the fact that there's no such thing as impossible, there's no such thing as all is lost, you always have a second chance, you also have the power to call out and cry out for it. The famous story with the Rebbe Rashab. There was a Chassid who went in to the Rebbe Rashab in Yechidus in a private audience and was crying and begging for something he needed. The Rebbe Rashab did not give him an answer, did not give him a blessing. So of course, which even made him even more upset. He left the room of the Rebbe Rashab and he was completely distraught. He bumps into the Razah, the Rebbe Rashab's older brother, and the Razah says, "What's the matter?" He says, "I went into Yechidus, the Rebbe will not bless me." So the Razah went into the Rebbe Rashab and said to him, as a Rebbe Chassid comes in and the Rebbe is not fulfilling what he's asking. So the Rebbe Rashab said, "Send him back in." The Chassid went back in and the Rebbe Rashab gave him the blessing and it was fulfilled and everything was all right. So of course the obvious question, why did he need to have the Razah to come in and this man should be so distraught? So the Rebbe Rashab explained, because he needed that type of desperate need coming, the cry had to come from a very deep and real place, a sincere place of the person. Now, of course, when he came in originally, he had the need, or else he wouldn't have asked. But sometimes you need to dig even deeper. And when a person really cares and really cries with a true sincerity, it pierces heavens. We hear this all the time. Min ha'meitzer karosika, anani b'merchavka. Min ha'meitzer. Same word as Mitzrayim. From our dire straits, when you call out, then is anani b'mercha. Why do you need meitzar? Why can't God just initially answer? Because there's something about human initiative, and especially from a narrow place where you feel really trapped, and you cry out, there's a certain intensity that comes when something is very constricted. Like we see, and Chassidus gives the example many times, that when you restrain something, let's say you build a dam, and stop the water from flowing, that causes the water to begin flowing with such a surge afterwards that it breaks through the dam, and even the resistance itself becomes part of the forward flow. That's what it says in some Maimarim, that the stones themselves, whatever the dam is made of, that become part of the forward flow of the rush of water, which you would never have known existed had there not been that resistance. So that type of element, that actually only a person who's derech recheka, who feels distant, who feels the dissonant, who feels disoriented, all the different words you can apply to the word derech recheka, and someone who's tameh, who's been defiled, has been polluted, has in some way made a mistake, or did something that defiled them, they were unable to experience that transcendent experience, that precisely that so-called negative state can be the catalyst and the springboard for the greatest achievements. Now, how much more Chassidus Applied does it get? And this is very direct, the lesson of Pesach Sheini. Of course, it can be applied to every one of us in our own personal way, and we all have our own challenges. But remember, a challenge can be seen as simply an opportunity, an impediment. A block can be seen as bringing you down and demoralizing you, like he says in Tanya, then just weakens you and you can't even fight the battle. Or it becomes a catalyst, it becomes a drive, a type of, elicits from us more strength to bring more energy out of us to overcome this particular challenge. And that comes from below, and that nothing is fafal. And though last year we learned that Pesach Sheini, this year again we learned that, which means it's a constant message that we learn every year again to remind us, and to teach us about new situations where we may think we have already, some people, God forbid, call themselves damaged goods, or feel that for me it's too late, I've lost something, I lost my innocence, or I lost my opportunity, or the dreams, or the idealism that we once had. It's not correct. Besides the fact that God recreates existence anew every moment. And Chassidus says not just b'chol yem, it means b'chol rega, not just every day, but every moment. It's a fresh new energy. So Pesach Sheini gives us even more powerful, that even when there's a difficult situation, that difficulty itself can be turned into and transformed into a positive, in addition to telling us that there is always opportunity. We learn also this week is also the Parsha of Behar, Chutz La'aretz, because of the Shnas HaIbur, because of the leap year that we're in. So the next extra month, we separate parshas, certain parshas become separate. So Behar B'Chukese is often together, but in leap years they're usually separate, which be able to account for all the more than 52 weeks that of the year. However, because in Israel, Pesach is one day Yom Tov, and if it's an akfiyas like this year that it was Shabbos, so then you have the last day of Pesach is a parsha. You read a new parsha. For us outside of Israel, we continue to read the Achar Pesach Kriyas HaTorah. So with the next parsha, which was after Pesach, is the next Shabbos. So there's a discrepancy for a period of time, which I believe goes till Matis Maseh, which will be another month or two, or more even. Matis Maseh, the 3 weeks, where they will become equal again. So we have interesting phenomenon that if someone travels from Israel to Chutz La'aretz, they will hear one parsha, but they have to hear a different parsha, the next parsha, which is theirs parsha, which is B'Chukese this week. So let's begin with Behar. Behar has many lessons. I'll just touch upon one that is also connected to the theme of Chassidus Applied. There's, as I said, you could apply it to any particular message, but nevertheless, Behar has its own message. So I remember one fascinating sikh of the year, Tov Mem Zayin, Behar Tov Mem Zayin, the Rebbe spoke about Har being Semeach Shebedemim. Semeach Shebedemim means that we have the 4 species, the 4 kingdoms, so to speak. You have the mineral kingdom, you have the vegetable, you have animal, and you have the human being, which is Demim Tzemeach Chaim Medaber. Yet in Shar Drushi Atzilis in Eitz Chaim of the Arizal, he explains that even though there's 4, there's also an intermediary, a mamutza, an interface between all 4, which means there's something that is in between Daimim and Semeach. That is referred to between Daimim and Semeach as Almuge Hayam. These are the coral in the sea, because they grow, but on the other hand, they're mineral. Then you have, sometimes it says Melech, even salt is sometimes intimated, but Eitz Chaim upon him it says Almuge Hayam. Then there's a thing called Adne Hasada, actually animals that grow on plants. It's brought in the Mishnah. And then you have, he says, a monkey is an intermediary between Chai and Medaber, an ape, a kuf. But when you talk about mountains, in some places it says a mountain is Tzemeach Shebedemim, and sometimes an interface. Why? Because on one hand, a mountain is made of rock. That's demim, that's mineral. On the other hand, it grows. So in that sikha, the Rebbe brings together all the different places. What does it mean it grows? Mountains grow. Yes, they do grow. And they grow mostly due to the debris or objects that do with the winds that blow to the mountain, and the mountain can actually expand. But the Arizal explains that a mountain actually is Tzemeach Shebedemim. It actually has a growth element to it. Today in science we know many mountains were volcanoes. Volcanoes grow. How do they grow? Because when they erupt, the lava accumulates and it makes and creates more of a mountain. It can create a new mountain. So you see the consistency. Regarding Avedus Hashem, the mineral, the mountain aspect is the steadiness and the firmness of an inanimate mountain, of an inanimate stone. On the other hand, we all need to always have growth. So which is also a connection to B'Chukese. Because on one hand, Behar is mountain, is a steady. When you say a mountain, it means a powerful, rigid, firm, powerful force, like a Har Sinai. On the other hand, when we read B'Chukese, we say B'Chukese Telechu. Telechu comes from, it means to move, to travel. That when you follow in these paths, when you will follow Telechu, you will travel and follow my laws. In B'Chukese Telechu, the word Halicha. So, and we know in Aveda that you need to have in person's service not just firmness and consistency, you also need to have movement. Yelchu mechayel el choyel. Yelchu. To move from one strength to the next. Mile and bekedish. We have to always grow. So the Rebbe asks in a number of talks, how do you reconcile these two? So a mountain, knowing that it's Sameach Shabbatim, there you have the reconciliation, you have both. It's firm like a mountain, it still doesn't move, but it always grows. And when you look at a tree has those elements. On one hand, it's deeply rooted in the ground, which is what keeps it firm. On the other hand, it's constantly branching out and growing and expanding, which demonstrates the need for both elements in a person's life. There are people who their consistent foundational elements are always shifting. You need to have foundational elements that are in place. The classic analogy they give, which is not from Chassidus, is about the guy who taught a class in time management. And to demonstrate the significance of time management, of the power of time management, he brought in a demonstration. He brought in an empty aquarium and then a few sacks. What were in the sacks? So he took out sack number one, big boulders, and he put them in the aquarium and filled them up to the top. And asked the class, is this aquarium full? So some said yes, some said no. Bag number two, he had small pebbles, and he poured them into the aquarium. Small pebbles. So now, of course, it filled up all the crevices. And is it full now? Again, most said yes, some said no. Bag number three, he took out fine sand. Fine sand filled even those nooks and crannies where the small stones and pebbles could not fill. And he filled it up to the top. Is it full now? Most again said yes, but few people saw there was another bag, so obviously there's more to come. And what was in the fourth bag? Pitchers of water. Now water is even finer than fine gravel. So the water, obviously, till it spilled over, then it was full. Is it full now? Yes. Okay. So now you had the big rocks, you had the small stones, you had the fine gravel, and now the water. So he said, what do we learn from this? So of course, a few smart Alex said, we learned from this, obviously it's time management course, that as much as you fill up your day, you can always fill it up a little more. He said, no, that's not what we learned. We learned from this that if you don't put the boulders in first, you'll never get them in. The first thing is you have to have your foundations that are unwavering. If your life gets so filled up with minutia and details, whether it's small pebbles or it's gravel or it's water or other things, you'll never get the rocks in. The rocks are the foundational elements of our ethics, of our morality, our belief system, our calling, our family, and so on. So that's Behar, the mountain side, the Daimim side. The Sameach side is once you have that in place, if you only have that, then you don't have movement, then you don't have growth, then you just have a steady foundation. A building, any building needs a foundation that doesn't move. But then it needs floors above it. We don't live in the foundation. We don't live in Kabbalah Sale. We live in the movement of Giluyim, Chassidus says, in our emotions and in our intellect. So you need a foundation to keep things steady, but then you need the expansion and the growth that comes with the Sameach Shebe Daimim. So there we have, which is the growth within the mineral, so to speak, the growth within the steadfast. The combination of two, and this formula, if we were all able to master it, we'd solve a lot of issues. Many people feel empty, so they go look for some high, they look for some new change because they need something new, and sometimes they tamper with and they undermine their foundations. And sometimes people have the foundations, but there's a certain lack of spontaneity and a lack of spunk and excitement. And relationships especially, you need both. Healthy relationships is both. It's like music. Music is musical notes, they always stay the same. But you have to play the music every time differently. Same thing when you daven. You could say Shema, the same words, we say the same words. But you don't have to, but the kavanah, the intention should be different every time. Shabbos, same thing with all mitzvahs. You can do it mechanically and do it mitzvahs anashim ulamada by rote, or every time you infuse it with new passion, with a new intent, with a new application. And that's what keeps things alive when you have those two elements that come together. So there you have Behar, B'chukaysay, and Pesach Sheini. Let's finally deal with Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is this Thursday. Sometimes it's called the Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. That's what it's called in Svartim and Sofrei Samach Vav. He calls that Matan Torah of Pnimis HaTorah. Now, we know Matan Torah, of course, Sinai says also in Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab's Mamorim, as Matan Torah v'nizay nochamal. Matan Torah was only once, and obviously included everything. Torah shebiksav, Torah b'pirusha nitna, as the Rambam says. the written Torah, the oral Torah, which includes Pnimis HaTorah. So what does it mean that was the Matan Torah, Pnimis HaTorah? Obviously, in a revealed way. When was revealed? The Zohar, the Kodesh, the Holy Zohar, which part of it talks actually about Lag BaOmer, the last day of Rashbi's life, in the Idra Zuta. The Idra Zuta is the Idra Rabbah and Idra Zuta. The Idra Zuta is in Parshas Hazinu in Zohar, Volume 3. There it describes the group. Idra is like a group, which Idra Rabbah means the larger group. There were 10 of students of the Rashbi, but then a few of them passed away, so there were 7 when the Rashbi passed away on the Istalkus of the Rashbi on Lag BaOmer. And that's when he said the famous lines that Bechad Katiris Katarna, today's a day where I become bonded with one with God Himself without the limitations, similar to what it says in the Geras HaKedesh about Histalkus, where the body is no longer in the way, so the Ishtakich Yatrim B'chayui, where the soul can now expand and not be confined by the box called the body. And that's when he breaks the request, as is brought in Kabbalah, and Chassidus elaborates, that there should be a Yom Simcha, there should be a day of joy. Now, obviously, Lag BaOmer, people ask, does that mean the day when Rashbi passed away, they didn't sit Shiva? Of course they sat Shiva. But he meant as it went into generations, don't see this as a sad day, see this as a day of revelation, a day of elevation. So though they're accustomed, some people by tzaddikim, the day of tzaddikim's yahrzeit, some people fast. Rashbi absolutely forbade it, and one of his students did that. There was a whole issue and had to pay that, which is not for now. Because, as the Rebbe explains, why Rashbi? Because Rashbi connected together the Pnimius and the Nigla. He was, of course, a great Talmudic sage, but he was also the father, so to speak, and the sage of Kabbalah, the revealer of Pnimius HaTorah. The soul and body, in the words of the Zohar and Baal Escha, Nishmosa Daraisa and Gufa Daraisa. That Nigla, which is Halacha, which is Gemara, which is Talmud, talks about a revealed part of Torah. You can say it's the body of Torah, as he calls it. But there's the soul of Torah, and the soul of Torah is the inner dimension. And Rashbi joined these two together. When you join these two together, there's a seamless flow. The idea of life and death, and there's pain involved, is when we don't have the connection between body and soul. But if a human being embodies that seamless connection between body and soul in Torah, and from Torah it spreads to the rest of the universe and to human beings, then it's a day of total joy because there's a no break. That's why it says by Rashbi that for the Rashbi there was no churban. Rabbi Hill brings it in the name of the Alter Rebbe. Even though he lived after the destruction of the Second Temple, because he was in a place that was higher than churban. There's a place that's higher than destruction. The destruction happened on a certain plane, and it's a destruction that's real. But if you go to the deepest connections, where revealed meets the hidden, then it's higher than any form of destruction. The relevance to us is that this was given as a directive to each one of us. Lag BaOmer became, in all communities, a day of celebration, especially children, and especially in our day and age, you have the parades, you have the picnics, you have the different things we bring out the children, all connected to Rashbi's day. So they clearly, even though he was a mystic of the highest order and a sage of the highest order, but he gave us the power to connect it to, which also explains another thing. You know, the Mittler Rebbe says Nayem Yem, brought from different places, which was taken from different places. Hayem was the Rebbe's collection of things he heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe, or written sichos or ideas and so on, that he summed up and codified, so to speak, for a daily order of Hayem Yem, the Tavshin Gimel. So in Lag BaOmer, he brings that the Mittler Rebbe would go out into the field, and it was a special day. We would give brachas, especially for those that needed children. Basically, it was a day to challenge the challenge of infertility. In some places, the Rebbe brings that it says, what is the connection to Rashbi and Lag BaOmer? That it says in Medrash that Rashbi was Peked HaKoros, meaning people who are barren, God forbid, women. He gave them blessings, and he was able to open up so-called locked wombs. The Rebbe speaks in the Sikh and Lag BaOmer, I think it's Tov Mem, maybe not, Mem Aleph, where the Rebbe says Peked HaKoros doesn't just mean physically, also spiritually. Sometimes when parents and children don't have a good relationship. So Lag BaOmer has a power to open up channels. Now, why? Because that's exactly it. Eid Hagal Hazeh is what Yaakov and Lova made the deal, that this Gal, which is the letters Lag BaOmer, as explained in the Siddur, the Mittler Rebbe explains it, Gal is a mound, which is like a border. And Rashbi breached the borders between things. So usually the conscious and the unconscious of a person are very two different worlds. Similar to Kriyas Yamsuf. Land and sea are two different worlds, sometimes referred to the hidden worlds and the revealed worlds, or the conscious experience or the superconscious experience. And Kriyas Yamsuf parted Hofach Yom Liabosha. Once in history, it parted and showed that these two worlds connect. Rashbi did a similar thing. He bridged the two worlds, and therefore all channels are opened. When a person has a difficulty giving birth, whether we're talking physically or spiritually, or they have a difficulty in the relationship between those they gave birth to, the parent and child, so you need a force like Rashbi Pekad HaKodesh to open up these channels. You need a force that goes beyond the concealed and beyond the revealed, that can bring out the concealed into the revealed dimension, which of course in psychological terms really means being able to access latent or dormant forces within us that for whatever reason are blocked due to either life experiences, due to being hurt, due to being repressed, fears and so on. So like Be'emer opens up such channels. In that sense, Matan Torah of Primus HaTorah, it teaches us and becomes the Matan Torah of Primus HaTorah, including Chassidus, which of course was derived and followed Kabbalah, even though the Rebbe Marash says Kabbalah is Abir and Chassidus, which is another discussion, not for now. But nevertheless, technically speaking, Kabbalah came before Chassidus. And Chassidus bases so much on Kabbalistic ideas, the idea of taking the hidden and bring it into the revealed. So applied Chassidus is all about accessing the healthy resources that lies within our spirit, within our soul, and sometimes are blocked, and being able to access it. So Lag Ba'emer is a day that has special power to do so. It's just a summation of one central theme in Lag Ba'emer. Okay, with that said, let's go into, maybe the rest, the good segue to that would be, is fear of public speaking. One of the impediments people have, as one writer writes, standing up and addressing a crowd is one of the greatest possible fears for many people. Why is public speaking such a prevalent and terrifying fear? Is it rooted in the fear of rejection? Most importantly, what tools does Chassidus provide for overcoming this fear? I do recall the Rebbe writing about it in a letter, and I was looking, I couldn't find it. So if someone does have a source, please send it. But I'll share what I remember, and also some other ideas that come from the Rebbe's approach in general and answers to people, the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. So to go into analysis of the fear of speaking, yes, the fear of rejection is obviously the most obvious reason for people being afraid to get up to speak. The fear of failure, you're getting up and you're exposing yourself. People may laugh at you, whether can you say it right. So it has a lot to do with confidence. There's no question that a person with more confidence will have less concerns and fears with speaking. But I don't know if anybody has absolutely no element of some apprehension before they speak. And I speak for myself as well, even though I've done this and doesn't come difficult for me. Nevertheless, every time you speak, especially if you take your work seriously and you take your audience seriously, there's a certain element of certain apprehension, you can say, a certain anticipation that gets the adrenaline flowing because you want to convey an idea, you want to do it successfully, and you don't want to fail. So the fact is we all have pride and we all have ego, and we want to succeed in communicating something. And the only thing is, once you do it for a while, you learn, you have experience, and you build the confidence that you know you can do it. You know that you've been there already before, and you've also had those concerns, and you're able to do it. Now, sometimes it doesn't come out exactly as planned. Sometimes it's better than you planned, and sometimes it's not as good as you planned, even though you had the ideas clearly. But I'll share a few things, as I said, from what I recall from memory, and a few other points. Let me begin with maybe the most important thing. I remember it was a young speaker who was just beginning his career, called me one day. He was panicking. He's about to go out to speak in Chicago. It was, and he's going to speak something. It was something about science and Torah. And he sees in the audience scientists and academics and professors. And he's a young guy in his 20s. Who is he to speak in front of them? So he had this panic attack, so to speak, stage fright, they call it. The butterflies in the stomach, some people refer to it as, and not knowing whether he really should do this. So I made 2 points which I think are critical, and this is the key, I believe, to overcoming such fears. To sit and analyze why we have fears and the fear of rejection. Many people just don't want to put themselves out on the limb. They stay in their comfort zones. That is one approach. I'm not going to take the approach of analyzing and trying to dissect all the reasons. If you feel you need to do that, maybe go to therapy or a mashpia or somebody to talk it through. Let's talk about what really gets someone to be able to do it, besides just overcoming the fear. There's a positive way to do this. I pointed out two things to this fellow. I said, why are you getting up to speak in the first place? What gave you a right to speak to anybody? Forget about whether it's professors or not professors. You're a younger guy. Many people are older than you. They have more experience. That's question number one. And question number two is this the most important thing you can be doing in the next hour and the most important thing that your audience can be doing? If your answer to those questions, to that question is no, then why are you doing this? You have to know that when you're getting up to speak, you have something to say that is vital for you and for them to hear. And it's worth the time to listen. That means you're respecting the dignity of people's time and people's attention, including your own. So you know they have a very compelling reason, because there are a lot of important things to be done. Why are we doing this? And the answer to both those questions is because you're not saying your own words. You're not here to share your wisdom. You're a person who is in a position that has learned Torah, has learned Chassidus, has heard the Rebbe, or whatever it is that you have experience in, and you're sharing something, truths that are higher than you are. You're just a channel. And why is it the most important thing? Yes, because this is relevant to our lives. It's not because your wisdom is so powerful. To be enamored with yourself, you say, oh, I'm going to now bestow my benevolence on others. That is not going to work. Maybe some people can do that. They have that arrogance, the ego. But especially when you're talking about personal, spiritual matters. It's one thing a guy gets up to talk about real estate tips or how to make $1 million or how to cook. Fine, people come to hear not the person so much, but the message. But when you're talking about personal matters, spiritual matters, relevant matters, about life, about relationships, about dealing with pain, etc., there it's very vital that you have that humility to know, because nobody wants to hear about humility from an arrogant person. So what you say is not just what you say, it's who's saying it and how you're saying it and who do you think you are when you're saying it. And that's the critical component. Why? If you were told that you should get up and say something, and the Rebbe especially told young people from young age, go and speak in shuls or in other places, they could say, who am I? What? You're not doing this. It's not about you. It's about the cause. If it's about you, then I understand why there may be a fear. Maybe you should start thinking the cause. Of Avram Hecht, I heard the story from him. He was a young man, a young bocher in yeshiva. Friedrich Rebbe encouraged him to go speak in shuls, to share Dvar Torah, to share a thought from Chassidus. And he said, Rebbe, it's not for me. My brother, Shlomo Zalman, Yankel, they're speakers. Shlomo Zalman Hecht was in Chicago. He was a well-known orator. Yankel Hecht was also a well-known orator. It's not for me. And the Friedrich Rebbe responded to him, Anova, Shalebim Kema Yusedose Gaiva. Misplaced humility is rooted in arrogance. Because it wasn't just being so humble. He's like, doesn't want to enter there. Maybe he's not going to be successful. Maybe he won't shine as much as his brothers or whatever. What is the real point of the matter is? This is what you're given a mission. Moshe Rabbeinu teaches us this lesson, even though who can compare it to Moshe Rabbeinu? And yet we learn the lesson, and the Rebbe brings it in the Sikh of Gimel Shvat, famous Sikh, a few weeks, 6 weeks before the stroke. That Moshe, of course, said, Lo ish dvarim anechi. I'm not a man of words. And he said, Aral Svasayim. And kvad peh, kvad loshen. 3 different ways of saying that I cannot speak. Send Aaron. He's the speaker. And you need to speak to Pari. You need to convince him. You need to persuade him. You need a good argument. You need someone who can speak well. Can you imagine a person who's stuttering or has a speech impediment speaking to Pari and trying to convince him? And what does God say? The most famous words, Misam Pela Adam. Who then gave a man a mouth to speak? I'm not looking for you to say your words. I'm looking for you to say my words. And this man of no words, Lo Yish Dvarim, becomes the person, Eila Dvarim Asher Dibra Mesha. These are the words that Mesha spoke, words that are poured over more than any other words in history. In the Torah. In Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh. How much has been written to analyze every word that was uttered from Mesha's mouth that was from Hashem? Eila Dvarim Asher Dibra Mesha. So these words become words that are etched in our psyches and on a cosmic level for eternity. Of a man that had no words, because he realized, and that's what exactly God was. I didn't want to speak. I'm not looking for an orator. I'm not looking for an entertainer. I'm not looking for someone who can sway crowds and convince them. I'm looking for someone who's going to convey the word of truth. And truth is not about people, it's about the word of God. Now, can we assume that we can do that? You do the best. It's not about you. As soon as you realize it's not about you, and you're given a job that you're in a position to speak to someone on a plane. Even, I'm not talking about a speech, public speaking, one-on-one. Some people avoid doing that also. Introvert, they can say their reason, or other reasons. But if this is what was given as the job, then why are you letting your ego and your fear of success, or you're convincing yourself you may be not good at it, get in the way? You were told this is what you have to do. That's how you overcome this fear, in my opinion. Not by just analyzing. Everybody has fears. All of us have fears. Even people who look very courageous and very confident. Everybody has fears. One of the best ways to get over fears is realizing you have a calling. You were sent here for a reason. You were sent to do this job, and now you're going with the strength of the one that sent you, the Mishaleach. The Eibishter himself, and the Shluchim that the Eibishter chose, the Rebbe, in our generation, and in each generation, the Nasi of each generation, is the power that we carry. By Sugibun Neben, you're tied above, you don't fall below. Now, of course, there are times that we can get our egos can get in the way and we can make mistakes. It's part of life. Shgiyas miyovin. But that's what we were told to do. So you correct yourself and you keep growing, you get better at it, and you perfect, and you continuously learn through experience. So that's the approach I would take in this matter. And I said it follows somewhat like Behar because it's opening up those inner channels and getting beyond the impediments. Okay. Let's now go to a topic which is always challenging to speak about, but how could we not? As the Friedrich Rebbe says, it's hard to speak, but it's harder to remain silent. So the way it was phrased, even though I'm not a personal fan of these words, who is running the show now? Now, show, of course, is just a quote-unquote show. Who is running the show? We seem to be experiencing a serious vacuum in leadership. People cannot even agree on an authority to trust. With various issues arising, like the recent controversy around building an Eruv in Crown Heights, how are we to find any clarity today? How important is the Rebbe's role in our lives today? I have heard some people argue that we now have to rely on ourselves and not on the Rebbe. Is there any truth to that? And without the Rebbe here physically to ask him directly, how are we to resolve issues, especially those roiled in disagreements? Well, this is a question obviously that's come up many, many times. I've addressed it from different angles, but clearly it's become perhaps more acute, more obvious as time passes. Gimel Tammuz is 21 years ago, a lifetime, and there'll be 22 actually years in this Gimel Tammuz. Maybe we hope it shouldn't be. We should be reunited with the Rebbe. Yet the question, of course, is a very affecting generation. Is a new generation has been born that never saw the Rebbe. And the Rebbe was here begashmius, so there was a doubt, there was a question the Rebbe was there to ask directly. Sometimes the Rebbe himself intervened when he saw a situation that needed to be intervened. So it's a very legitimate question. As I said, it's difficult to talk about because, not so much for me to talk about it, but because I see the mere fact that there's questions like this, very painful. Because it means that certain people are missing the boat, if I could put it that way. Now, I'm not saying this in any form of judgment or in any form of critique, I'm just saying it as an observation. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu came, I mentioned Moshe came as a shliach of the Eibishter. He sent him. The Jews were reluctant. They didn't know who this man was, this stranger was. But it became obvious this is God's man and God's person, a man of God that came to first redeem them from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, then to take them through Kriyas Yamsuf, to Matan Torah, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messinai, and lead them through the 40 years in the wilderness. And whatever the reasons, unable to take them into the promised land. But we were told that in every generation there's a Moshe that comes afterwards. Moshe is pastusha de Moshe b'chol dara, in every generation, a leader. That is a man of God that continues to continue the legacy and the teachings and the guidance and direction needed in each generation. In each generation, Shoslan b'chol der v'der, as the Alter Rebbe cites Chazal and Tanya. In each generation, God planted a leader and leaders to direct and guide us through the difficult journeys, especially once we enter into Golus, where the darkness increased. So you even need more directional leadership. This is the foundation of all of Torah and Yiddishkeit. Vayiminu ba'Hashem b'b'meisha avdei. And we have it in, whether it's in the language that it was a Nasi Hadar, or a Av Bezdin, or a Melech. Not getting now, or Novi, the Kohen Asher B'yamecha. You have many expressions of how leaders are called and their roles, and they're not always the same. But the idea is there all the time. Later maybe they would name the Rosh Yeshiva, Atana. There are many different expressions, but they always existed. So when you start asking a question, where do you go for direction and clarity, it's very clear. Every generation has its leader. Now, Nasi Adar, in our generation, I'm talking now for Chassidim who consider themselves Chassidic Chabad. Those that don't, is another discussion, have the Rebbe. Now, you could say Gimel Tammuz, yes, the Rebbe is physically not here, but the Rebbe's directives, the Rebbe's teachings, live and live on for anyone who wants to access them. So, and the Rebbe, even when he was here, Begashmis, as I've talked about many times, based on the Tanya, Nageres HaKedesh, Chai Psarim, Ein Chai Psarim. The tzaddik's life is not flesh. Eyes and flesh and blood, you can see, and you go into Yechidus, and you could touch him even. But that's not his primary thing. It's Ava, V'yira, and Amunah, as he says in Nageres HaKedesh. After this, Talkus, you only have that. Now, I understand the challenge that we need tangible things. But we know that as Jews, we never needed, God forbid, something to replace, God. That's Avodah Zarah. But we always needed teachers and rabbis and people in our lives. So we have an assignment, we have a challenge. But does that challenge the emes of the teachings? Just because a Gimel Tammuz happened? So now the challenge is far more difficult, but far more in a way internal, because we have to embrace it in our terms. You can't just rely and say there's a Rebbe sitting, he's going to do this and this for us. Though the firm belief is that the Rebbe continues to work, which means just as then he served, he continues to serve. Reyet Sein, a shepherd of sheep. A shepherd does not does not forsake his flock. All that is correct. But you could say it's behind the scenes. In the scene that we are on the ground, is being wise enough and understanding that now we need to draw from it more than ever, because we cannot have that type of crutch and dependency. You know, when a light is shining in a room, a bright light, you don't see the cracks in the wall. When the light is dimmed or the light is concealed in some way, you suddenly see the cracks. So that's what we're seeing, a lot of cracks, unfortunately. So who's running the show? First of all, God's running the show. Let's start with that. And God, through His Shluchim and through the Rebbe, are running the show. Whether you feel it or know it or want to embrace it, that's your business. But that's how it is. What we have to do is figure out how to access it and how to apply it to our lives. It's as straightforward as that. Now, the Rebbe, in addition, gave us directives. Some could say he anticipated perhaps this situation. And he said it in the famous Mitzvah Shabbos, Vayakel Sicha in Tovshin Mem Ches. There's a Truma, Mitzvah Shabbos Truma, Tovshin Mem Ches, which was a very disturbing sikha, but at the same time directives clearly what to be done in a situation where you cannot ask him directly. And even prior to that, the concept of Aseh L'Charav, the concept of medical, that's in areas of Torah and Halacha and personal advice, the concept of going from medical things to doctors and so on. And you have many direction in this, and this is the Rebbe speaking. He's not just, so to speak, pushing the idea, the job off to others, as some people mistakenly think. He's giving them the koyach. For every reason, until Mashiach comes and is revealed in the fullest sense of the word, this is the koyach they have to do it. So as the Rebbe working through them, just like when the Torah says we give a reif permission, a doctor permission to heal, it's not the doctor suddenly became the healer. Ani Hashem reifecher, God is the healer. But the healer is saying, here's some of the ways I'm helping heal, by placing doctors in this world, giving us the wisdom of medicine, and allowing us to be able to access it and be channels. That's how we have to see it. I, the Rav, or as the Rebbe put it then, the Rabbonim in each shchuna, the Chassidus Rabbonim should make decisions, are human beings. Yes, they're human beings. But it doesn't help when you start undermining them, and machlekes causes one to attack the other, and you get yourself a situation where even that power, we have pechira. So the Rebbe gave power, but he can't kavyochel stop us from battling with each other. So that's another discussion. I'm not here to preach to these leaders and so on the damage done by the divisiveness that exists. But there's one thing is for sure. To fulfill the Rebbe's directive in this regard is possible only when you have respect for these Rabban. Now, our job is to find the Rav that you can find respect for, listen to, and be guided by that. You have a question, Mehechen Dantuni, what is the Rav, so where is it based on? So he can give you his sources. We have the Rebbe to turn to. It's very disturbing to hear how people think either they can figure it out on their own, or that they can replace, or that today we don't need to have those directives. Absolutely not true. It's the equivalent of someone saying we don't need the Torah anymore because Moshe is not here. The Torah was given thousands of years ago. We have to figure it out on our own. The Torah's Chayim, part of God's plan is, obviously, knowing there are times where we may have questions, but it's a living Torah. And it's a living Torah that's applicable to life today just as it was then. Is it more difficult? Yeah. But we cannot keep our eyes off the ball. There's a fear. There's someone running the world. And there's someone running the community. We have to be wise enough to let that happen by following the guidelines as they were given to us. So the questions are very legitimate questions, but the answer is very direct and straight. The Rebbe is running the show. And we have now the schus, and unfortunately also the ability to either align ourselves with that running, with that guidance, or not. I don't want to say the not. That's what it comes down to. Now, if someone says, I don't believe that, fine. I'm not here to argue with you. But if the Torah and the Rebbe means anything, it means now is the real, now we shall see who rises to the occasion. This is the challenge now. We're a lot different before Gimel Tammuz. Even though it was challenges, people had free will then, I'm not going to go into it. It was a Yetzer then too. I'm not going to go into all that as if everybody was doing exactly what they should be doing. Maybe if we did, we wouldn't have this situation. But now it's perhaps more pronounced. Not perhaps, definitely more pronounced. So that's my answer to the question. And in case by case, find the people you can speak to, Chassidic Jews, people who know Torah, they know the Rebbe's words, and follow that to go into this new mode that we're going to create an alternative, or we have now, or our own solutions, is absolutely, well, I'm not on board if anybody's trying to recruit me for that. We have a Torah, we have a Rebbe, and that's where you have to go for direction. You need more advice, more people to probe what the Rebbe wants. On the contrary, so research it and figure out what it is, whether it's about a native or it's about other matters. And stop turning this into anything that's personal on any side. We are looking for the truth. You want the truth, let's find the truth. It's not about any personal agenda. It's what the truth is, about that matter or any other matter for that. And this also addressing different statements made by different people. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a Torah. If you want to say something, bring a source. If you can't bring a source, you shouldn't be in a position of an authority spouting ideas that are influencing others. You have to bring sources. It's the only reality check we have. It's not because we're smart. I have said things on this program and other times that made mistakes. I've made mistakes. Who doesn't make a mistake? The key thing is to know there's a source. You look it up, you see the source says differently. Okay, stand corrected. There's two ways to interpret the source, so be it. And I stand by that. People who write to me many times questions, and I see people who have personal agendas, and I see they continue to write. Sometimes they keep changing names, but they have their agenda. Since I don't know who they are officially, so I say the same thing again and again. Bring sources. Something you disagree with me, show me a source. Or show me how you interpret a source. Or show me how you understand it. Just this type of attack of this one's wrong or this one's... we're not in a world where we can afford today to just be spouting opinions. Because what's the worst possible thing that a mashpia or a teacher, suddenly you realize, you know what, this was his opinion. Who says it has any basis? And thank God we have thousands of pages of sources. We have the Rebbe's words, everything documented. We have the Rebbeim before that. We have a Shulchan Aruch. We have a Torah. So it's not like we're looking for some mysterious cryptic manuscript or we don't have, or source that we haven't found. We have more than any human being can even master through in a lifetime. It's not enough that I can say about this topic, and I'm more happy to talk about it more simply for one purpose: clarity and the truth and the kavanah. That's what you do. Libun hilchasa. You research it without negias and pigias, which means without biases and prejudices and personal interests. And you look for the truth. That's all we're looking for. If we all had that mindset, we would have most of our problems would be gone, if not all. Okay. Let's go now. The next question is, Why do some not celebrate Yom Hashoa, Yom Haatzmaut, and Yom Hazikaron? We could add Yom Yerushalayim as well into there. This is referring to different days that are celebrated by many Jews in Israel and outside of Israel, connected to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, which is the day of Yom Haatzmaut, the day of independence, similar to July 4th in the United States. And the same thing, Yom Hashoa, honoring the Holocaust, there's a day dedicated to that. Another day is dedicated to particular events that happened in the Jewish life in the last 7 decades, we can say. So here's the way the poem phrased it. Much of the Jewish world recently observed Yom Hashoa, Yom Hazikaron, Yom Haatzmaut, and will celebrate Yom Yerushalayim later this month. It is clear that in Chabad and many other communities, they do not mark these occasions. Could you please discuss this topic on your next show? I would be interested to hear what the Rebbe's opinion was on these events, especially as he would constantly meet with and advise Israeli government officials. On a practical level, how do we relate to other Jews, whether religious or not, who take these days very seriously? For example, if I daven in a meeting that says Halal on Yom Haatzmaut, should I join in or at least not say Tachman? What would be the right way to respond to a sincere questioner and cannot fathom why religious Jews would not want to celebrate Israel or remember the Holocaust? On a hashkafa level, how are we to view the significance of these days in the context of modern Jewish history and the coming of Mashiach? Okay, this is not a small topic, as you can imagine, because beyond this goes into the whole attitude to Zionism, which I believe I spoke about in previous episodes a while back, and the debates that went on in the early 20th century, late 19th century, to the called modern Zionism, the rise of modern Zionism, and there were many, many opinions. The Rebbe Rashab initially was involved in Agudas Yisrael, then later backed out. So there's a whole history to discuss to really go into the issue, which I'm not going to go into now. What it should be the Torah approach to the whole, we'll call, state of Israel. But I did discuss it in the past, and I don't hesitate to discuss it again. I will refer to it, however, but I just wanted to make sure that in covering this, there's a lot of different angles and aspects to this. There's no question that there's no Jew on earth, a healthy person, that does not recognize that when you have more than 6 million, today the largest population of Jews in one place, in a land called Eretz Yisrael, in a land called the Holy Land, the Promised Land, that there's significance to that. That's not even a question. Hashem wouldn't want it to happen, it wouldn't have happened. As the Rebbe Rashab said, and the Friedrich Rebbe repeated, and the Rebbe repeated, not with our will we went into Golus, and not with our will we got. We cannot force the Geula. God doesn't want the Geula, it will not come. God forbid, obviously. Or it will come when He wants it. So that's not a question. Now, there are opinions that hold that some human beings, obviously we believe that Maseinu v'Avodaseinu, our efforts in Torah and mitzvahs, will speed up the Geula. That's the whole point. But the direct efforts in establishing something in Eretz Yisrael, for example, to go rebuild the Beis HaMikdash Shlishi, until we don't have a direct mandate, a direct command from God to do this, we don't do it. We're not talking about a certain minority, that's another discussion. So that's very clear that this Hashgacha Prat is that the last generations, Israel became a haven for Jewish people. The Rebbe himself sent shluchim there, built Kfar Chabad, Nachlas Har Chabad. The Alter Rebbe sent people. Okay, that's before the modern Israel, so to speak. But because it's a promised land, the Kedusha Sa'aretz remains, and the Alter Rebbe sent people. Chabad was built on that and supporting the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Those days they needed complete support from outside. They weren't able to do it. So the concept of Eretz Yisrael being a holy land was not a question. A promised land, not a question. The land that we pray toward and we direct our prayers and we face east, and it's in our prayers constantly, the Yerushalayim Irkochecha, the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael, and so on. It's all part and parcel of the essence of Jewish thought. That's a given. The question we're talking now is about the events that happened beginning in 1948. So here let me quote 2 letters. One letter that is a famous letter that everybody knows that the Rebbe wrote to the president of Israel, who was then Yitzchak ben Tzvi, in the year Tafshin Tazayin. So we're talking about the year 1956, I'm sorry. Tafshin Tazayin, 1956. And the letter is interestingly dated Yud Aleph Nisan that year. It's printed in Igros Kodesh, volume 12, page 414. She writes him a letter, the Rebbe, And then at the end, the Rebbe explains why he didn't add any titles in the beginning of the letter, because he's called president, which in Hebrew is a nasi. So the Rebbe writes that the reason he didn't do so, because from his youngest age in Cheder, from his youngest age, he would always imagine what the real nasi would be. Mashiach. What would the world look like when Mashiach comes? The ultimate leader. A world of peace. And how we will then be able to see and understand all the pain that we've gone through. It's a very moving letter, very powerful letter. So the Rebbe says, I didn't want to just use a title, just lefonim, which means just superficially. This title for me carries tremendous weight. And I hope you'll understand, and any apologies in order. Essentially what the Rebbe says. A similar letter, similar in content that I want to bring in our context, is to Shazar, also president of Israel. Shnei Zalman Rubinov. He was named after the Alter Rebbe. He considered himself a Chassid, and he came to see the Rebbe a number of times. We have the pictures and we have the videos of the Yedidus, the closeness, and the letters and the exchanges and so on. Now, he was controversial in some ways as well. This is also not the topic right now. One of the things that happened, once he wrote to the Rebbe a letter, that he writes to the Rebbe, you're writing to me, and you're calling me the president of Eretz Yisrael. When I gave an oath, when I became president, I'm the president of Medinas Yisrael, not Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is the land of Israel. Medinas Yisrael is the state of Israel. So he's saying to the Rebbe, writing to the Rebbe, and very candidly, why is the Rebbe depriving me from being a chassid? Because you're making me choose between my oath to the state and being a chassid, because you're writing to me Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe, in a classic, powerful letter, says to him, first of all, you're older than I am. You're a chassid longer before I was around. How could I deprive you from being a chassid? Then the Rebbe continues and says, on the contrary, Medinas Yisrael began in 1948. Eretz Yisrael began thousands of years ago when the Eibishter gave it to Avram Avinu and promised it. So on the contrary, the connection to Eden, to this land, is far stronger when you say Eretz Yisrael than when you say Medinas Yisrael. And I think there lies the key thing here. We're not talking now, there's many ways to discuss Yom Haatzmaut, and there are people who are very negative, people who do things that are not even appropriate in showing their negativity toward Israel. You have to take a positive approach. The positive approach is, we honor Eretz Yisrael because it was given by God, like it says in the first Rashi. That Keich Maisav Higid La'ameh, that God gave Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people, beginning with Avram Avinu, and told him to walk La'orcha La'rochva, and then reaffirmed it to Yitzchak and to Yaakov, and the whole journey of Eden out of Mitzrayim. On their way to the promised land where the Beis HaMikdash would be built. That's the promised land. So, on the contrary, to begin to honor something that happened in 1948 in a way diminishes this eternal power. Now, did something happen? Yes, something happened. The question is how you honor and celebrate it. There are many ways to honor and celebrate personally. But to turn it into something, in a way, becomes that's more powerful than the big picture. That's why the Rebbe didn't use the word Nasi, and didn't Nasi, because he saw Mashiach as a Nasi. Eretz Yisrael is the land. And the Rebbe was not a matter of diminishing or insulting anyone. On the contrary, it was broadening our relationship. That's the way we have to look at it. Now, we're not here to tell people every person can do as they see fit. And the way to explain it, however, is we're not here to fight. We're not here to say, you have this opinion, I have this opinion. There's an approach. Yom Hashoa, there was a position that many had, was let's dedicate this day. And in addition, they said as well that some people said, let's leave an empty seat at the Seder to remind us of the 6 million. The Rebbe said, why leave an empty seat? Fill the seat up with a Jew that wouldn't come to the Seder. It's the same approach. We remember the 6 million every day of the year. We remember Eretz Yisrael every day of the year. We say it how many times in the tefillos? So in any way to designate just a day, or just is almost like the Father's Day and Mother's Day. Fine, people have that idea. Father's Day should be every day. And Mother's Day is every day. Kibud Av V'Eim, one of the 10 commandments. So when you look at it that way, you're not in any way diminishing, you're broadening it. And that's the general approach I would take on this. Because time is limited, and I'm sure there'll be questions, I'll discuss it further. But I want to go over, due to the limited time, I want to go over to some topics I can't cover because of time. let me discuss the Chassidus question of the week and then the essays. Yeah. So the Chassidus question of the week. In Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2, chapters 357 and 358, the Rebbe Rashab explains how Chochma is the etzem and core of everything. He then continues to discuss how this is the level of Torah, the middle channel, Kav Hamtzoi. But later in chapter 362, which is 4 chapters later, the Hemshech explains that Chochma is limited to only the Kav HaYamin, the right channel of the sefiros. And that Das is the middle channel, the core force and central spine stringing all the sefiros together. How do we reconcile the two? So let me just explain a little more what it says here. So that we know when it comes to the spheres, there's usually 2 ways we structure the spheres. There's Zeh Tacha Zeh, so Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Ed, Yesod, Malchus. But that's not a dimensional structure. That's the order of the spheres as they emanated initially. The structural dimensions is like the human body. There's a right, left, and a center. So Chochma is to the right, Bina is to the left, Das is in the center. Chesed, Gvura, Chesed to the right, Gvura to the left, Tiferes in the center. Netzach to the right, Hod to the left, Yesod in the center, and Malchus in the center. If you made an image of this, it would look like a human structure. So in this context, Chochma is on the right. Chochma, Chesed, Netzach. Bina, Gvura, Hod, Baga. And in the middle you have Kesed, of course. Then you have Das, Tiferes, Yesod, Malchus. Now, of course, Kesed and Das are interchangeable. You don't count one when you count the other. Not for now. Now, suddenly, when you learn Ayin Beis, especially in other places in Chassidus, Chochma reigns supreme because Chochma is Ma'ayin to Motzah. It's sometimes called Reishish Hashtalshalos, or even higher than Reishish Hashtalshalos. It's the beginning of the conscious faculties or the conscious attributes. Kesed is, of course, Ukum Hu. It's dark, it's concealed. Chochma is Timah, the superconscious intelligence. But intelligence, which is the beginning of the entire structure, is Chochma. And in that sense, like he explains, Chochma is a atzmi. It carries the core of everything. Everything travels through Chochma. And that's why Torah identifies with Chochma. In that sense, Chochma seems to be right there, the central component, not structured. Then later, he says, a few chapters later, as the questioner is asking, Chochma is in the right path. And it's Das that really carries the central spine, so to speak, the central Mavriach min hakotza lakotza, the middle rod that runs from one end to the next. Now, if you think about it, the answer is right there. I haven't seen it specifically in Chassidus, and maybe they'll say it somewhere. If someone has a source on the contrary, I'd love to hear it. But basically, like many times in Chassidus, talks about that spheres have 2 roles. Chochma has 2 aspects to it. If you're talking about Chochma as being like the seed, like he speaks in chapter 2 in Tanya, the tipas hamayach ha'av, Chochma, and everything is rooted there. There you clearly are talking about something that's before there's a structure of right, left, and center. And then Chochma would either be center or it'd be beyond the word center because it's not yet structured. It's like the seed. Think of it as the one cell that is the nucleus that contains everything. Once it becomes structural, then Chochma has its place, which would be Chochma as intelligence or Chochma as the first spark of intelligence. The different ways Chochma is explained. But Chochma as Atzmi, which is Torah, you don't put Torah in the right. On the contrary, Torah is in the middle. Torah is Kav Hamtzoi. Avodah, Tefillah is in the left. Gemilas Chasodim is on the right. In that sense, it's talking about Aisha Bara Alma, that God created everything through Torah. Yisrael v'kudsha b'ruch kol echad. Torah is one with the God. Yisrael Araisa v'kudsha b'ruch kol echad. That Torah is one with God. It definitely can't just put it in the right side. It's talking about the essential component. So that's the center, the heart and soul of Chochma. Then there's, which is Alter Rebbe puts in chapter 35 in Tanya, and this is so much a theme in Ayin Beis, that Chochma the bittul, hu levade ve'en zulase, you sense bittul of Elokus there. That is clearly not a structural element, it's a fundamental element that affects everything, like he says in Ayin Beis, it's the atzmi or the atzmus of everything, and everything is, the etzem is the way it's seen in Chochma. Shemen, he says, you find Shemen in everything there. Then there's how it comes into a structure. So you have to say that Torah associates with the Chochma as it is the central element. And then when you talk about how it's structured, then Das becomes the so-called middle path. You could even say the spine originates in Chochma, but then it travels the middle of the body, from the back all the way down to the back, where and that's the centrifugal force, as they say. Okay, let's conclude with the essays. 3 essays. I'll just say one more example I'll give before I go to the essays. Teferes has also sometimes explained this way. Teferes, sometimes it says the mixture of chesed and gvura. On the other hand, we say Teferes is the kava mitzvah, the middle pad that bypasses chesed and gvura, goes all the way up. So there you see in the sphere itself, you could have the specific element of the sphere and you could have a central role. Similar to what's sometimes brought about keichav or other things that keichav, there's a name of a star that's called keichav, a specific star, and there's also keichav as it is. All stars are called keichav. You have the same thing in some of the mesechtes, that an entire seder is called a certain name, and then you have a particular pedic that's called that name. So you have this concept in several places. You have it in different areas where you have something that's both central and the same word or the same dimension has 2 aspects to it. Okay, the essays. Essay number 1 is Reciprocity, the name of the game, by Eli Sobel, 41 years old, Group 1 trading, Director of Research, Brooklyn, New York. Reciprocity. This is a very fundamental essay and a topic actually that many people wrote about, which is think good and it will be good. Trag good and sein good. Think good and it will be good. But he does it in a very comprehensive way, in a unique way. I find it to be, when I read it, to have a certain explanations that go beyond the obvious and well annotated, essentially discussing the idea and concept and dissecting betochen, trust. And of course explaining the Tzemach Tzedek's answer when he said Trach good v'zayin good. And then basically giving us a method at the end of how one applies it in dissipating anxiety, in visualizing a positive outcome, in increasing the study of Torah, prayer, and mitzvahs, engaging in natural means for a solution, and persistence. So he breaks it down into a real modality that works and that can be applied in real life. So, as I said, though it's a theme that many have written about, but this is definitely a unique essay, which is why it's in the top 10. So that's essay 1 that we'll deal with. Number 2, and again, all the essays can be seen by subscribing to meaningfullife.com, the weekly newsletter. You can find, and you'll get the new essays as they're posted. And you can also find them at meaningfullife.com/contest /essays. Second essay, Conquering I Can't, by Sashi Gutnick. 19 years old, Old Chana Seminary, Sydney, Australia. Again, a beautiful essay. How many times have we heard our children say, I can't? Have you ever considered it to be true? Are they really incapable of completing the task? This essay, she writes, will explore how a shift in our minds, in our attitude towards our capabilities, can empower us to overcome the fear of failure and leads to I can't attitude, encouraging us to take on greater challenges and provide the tools to impart this mindset to our children. And goes into a discussion, the issue at hand, and how the Chassidic approach, citing a very interesting private letter that Rebbe wrote about education. It's the letter is from Tezvav Tevis Tov Lamed Tes. Just to read it quickly, just to sum up, the Rebbe writes about that Chassidic that while we have to acknowledge our strengths in order to serve Hashem better, we must never be satisfied within the comfort zone of what we're good at. Here's the Rebbe's right, quote, education in the general worldly outlook is commonly regarded a process of acquiring formal knowledge in terms of basic and higher education, which is to be accomplished in the juvenile and adolescent stages of life. Needless to say, this is not the Torah concept of chinuch. Since the Torah is our life, Chayenu, it calls for a constant effort to strengthen and invigorate this life-giving process in everyday life. Each and every moment of the Jew's life must be consecrated to this purpose and constant striving to serve the Creator all the better from day to day. It continues explaining this using Tanya Perek Tezvav, and obviously using Moshe Rabbeinu as the model of the I can't attitude to translate it into I can attitude. Quoting Dr. Carol Dweck in Psychology that confirms this. And as I said, a very powerful essay in empowerment, in how do we conquer I can, by shifting our attitude toward our capabilities and the way we praise our children. We must constantly keep in mind that through effort and improvement going beyond our nature, we are considered he who serves Hashem. The basis of that chapter 15 in time. Okay. commend this essay as well. And finally, the essay number 3 is by Rivka Ehrentreu. It's a Hebrew essay. Miziras hanesuyin limzer shel ava v'shlemus. It can literally be translated as marriage as a platform for love and perfection, or it could be translated men and women so different, so perfect for each other. So Rivka Ehrentreu, 61 years old, teacher at Beis Rivka School in Brooklyn, New York. A very powerful essay taking matters of Chassidus and halacha and applying it to really a marital counseling, you can say. I think this can be used for many people to actually deal with challenges because it's structured well with the very clear headlines, using with the power of a woman in marriage and what she brings to the table, the different challenges that exist in relationships, and how we deal with all the outside forces that affect us. As I said, a well-written essay, well written, and very solid, very well sourced as well in Chassidic terms, and ultimately dealing even issues with Chitzenius, like the outer dimension of tznius and beauty, and how that all comes part of the dynamic relationship between husband and wife in marriage and relationship. So again, well-written essay as well, and again, top 10 essays, so they have, that speaks for itself. They're all fraction of a point away from each other, so all of these could have been easily the top essay, just different factors that the judges took into account. So with that, we will conclude this episode of MyLife Chassidus Applied. Questions that I have not addressed, we'll address next week. There were plenty of things I wanted to go into, but that's what it is. We have next week. So this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 116. Every Sunday, Hashem, thank God, please God, from 8 to 9, Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. And everyone have a very blessed week, Nishtakim for our following week, a week of Lag Beimer, a great Simcha, and a week of Behar, and Bechukesei and Eretz Yisrael. Everyone be blessed.